Thank you, Sam, for that lovely introduction, and we honor you, and we honor Laura and the rest of the team, Jordan, for all the folks that really work so bloody hard. You folks have no idea they had to deal with Fashion Week here at the same time. So moving over to Fashionistas, here come the documentary people. You can imagine what that must have been like. So thank you again.
What he said. Anyways, listen, thank you to Photoville for inviting Puerto Ricans from the Bronx to cross the river and come over to the BK. And we're going to talk about our favorite place, at least as Puerto Ricans, El Barrio. It's nice being in Brooklyn, and we joke about Brooklyn. We say the Bronx is the center of the known Rican universe, Fox Street specifically. But this area, actually just not that far from here, just south of here on Columbia Street, that was where the pioneros, the first real waves of Puerto Ricans arrived, actually. Not in El Barrio, not in the Bronx, but right here on Columbia Street. That was, when they used to come by boat, the famous Marine Tiger. And so, this area actually had some of the seeds, if you will, before Bushwick, before Williamsburg, and what have you. But like any Puerto Rican, eventually all roads lead to El Barrio. I mean, it's inevitable. Somebody has some connection. And when you look at coverage of places like El Barrio or the pictures that have been taken, some people might look at it as, pretty cool pictures, vintage pictures, classic New York, old New York with an E at the end, that kind of stuff. But, for those of us who grew up in El Barrio or were there to hang out or moved there later, or grew up in neighborhoods like El Barrio, we have a much more complicated relationship to El Barrio. I mean, the pictures are memories of places that were, of people that were, of neighborhoods that were. Back then, the transition to nothingness came from abandonment and arson. Now the transition is people are being actively pushed out for luxury housing, just like it's happening in the South Bronx. And it reminded me of, people like us, well, at least me anyway. When you go to some of these neighborhoods, it's kind of like being in Managua after the earthquake, where they still tell people directions. Oh yeah, go to where the Coke plant used to be, and then make a left and go about half a kilometer, and where the hospital used to be, make a right. That's how they give directions in Managua. And that's kind of like what I feel sometimes when I see these photographs, or I see the neighborhood and I see just a hint of what used to be, like on Lexington. If you look up the second floor, like at 111th around there, you'll see what that place was. But the other thing about places like El Barrio, Bushwick, the South Bronx, it has a certain view or a certain position, especially within the photographic canon. It just depends whose canon you're looking at, okay? But it's gone through waves. I mean, it's not just a question of a community that just happened to be a bunch of folks who were dealing with discrimination, a changing economy, a bankrupt city, you name it. It's also the community that gave us Judge Edwin Torres, the guy who wrote Carlito's Way. He's now the state boxing commissioner. Jack Agüeros, the founder of El Museo del Barrio, who then went on to a career as a poet. He wrote sonnets. He was crazy about Elizabeth Barrett Browning, for those of us who think, or those of you who think that we don't think of such things in El Barrio. Ed Vega, this great surrealistic and surly Puerto Rican. I mean, if those of you who ever met Ed, you know what I'm talking about. But these were all people that were from there. Never mind, there was Piri Thomas also from that area. There were all these people, Julia de Burgos, the great Puerto Rican poet. So we had that. Then you had in the 60s the tumult, but then you also had the Young Lords, which they just finished a run of Hiram Maristani's photographs of the Lords in East Harlem. And then like later on, you had the Nuyorican poets, starting with, the People's Church on 111th in Lexington. And then from there, you had people like Papoleto, who's still in El Barrio, and Pedro Pietri, who helped design this shirt with Adal Maldonado. That's why I'm wearing my Puerto Rican Embassy shirt. It's my tie to El Barrio. Adal and Pedro Pietri put this together in this really weird thing. But, I remember going to visit Ed Vega once on 116th and 2nd. We're in his house, and we're looking out the back, and there's a guy, like, hauling a TV set down the fire escape, right? It was, 1988, okay? And we look at that, and then Ed says, come on, let's go outside for a walk. And we wanted to go into this community garden that was like, had like maybe 8 casitas. It was huge. And all of a sudden, we're in Puerto Rico. We like forgot about everything else. Both of the things we saw fascinated us. Both of them represented our experiences. The guy boosting the TV and the folks, in casitas on 118th Street. You look at Joe's pictures. I see that world. I know that world. I feel that world. Very important. You feel that world. I look at some of these apartments. I can smell the coffee. I know there's a bottle of King Pine in that apartment somewhere. You look at the pictures. You could smell the wood, the soggy wood after a fire. That's like, that's what I remember from that, growing up in communities like that, those kinds of experiences. But if all you did was look at the negative aspect of those experiences, you'd be totally lost. If all you did was take very artfully composed photographs of that kind of stuff, you're missing it. You're absolutely missing it. Our world is a lot more complicated, and there's probably no one who's mined that best in El Barrio than Joe. And so really, what you did was landmark. That cover came out, everybody, it was like a bolt of lightning. Folks are talking about it everywhere. But before we start into that, what was your personal relationship to this community before you started shooting?
Well, my uncle had a candy store on 105th Street. Actually, it wasn't his candy store, and they used to run numbers. And 105th and 2nd Avenue, and I remember they started digging out that 2nd Avenue subway tunnel that many of you folks don't realize that. We started that a long time ago. Anyways, we used to go up there, me and my cousin, to, well, look at girls, of course, but this was the most important for us culturally, was we got to see the greatest salseros in the world perform for free. For free. So we had Hector Lavoe, we had Eddie Palmieri, we had Celia Cruz, we had, you name it, they performed there. And then we used to make it a special time to go up. I don't know if Old Timers Day was still happening then, which happens today. So it was more about this connection through family and then through community, because all we did was smoke mota and hang out on the streets and look at girls. That was it. And tried to steal the candy from my uncle's candy store until he had 4 chihuahuas, until the chihuahuas were locked onto our legs. And so we got busted, So that was the first initial contact, at 14, 15, 16 years old. And that was a huge thing to come from Brooklyn and take the train all the way up there. So we just wanted to see our people. But basically we wanted to see the girls. So...
What did the community look like then? What do you remember of how that place was, what the rhythms were of the people?
Well, everything was on the street. I remember my father came over on the classic boat, the Marine Tiger, and he landed not necessarily he landed in Williamsburg, actually, on the south side. So he knew about the community as well, and so with references as we got older, what we saw was just well, our grandmothers, our aunts, everybody was on the street or in the windows. The window was a special place. That's why I fell in love with, you'll see some of the scenes from the window, because it was like the movie screen. So all of our aunts, uncles, cousins, especially the boys who were not allowed to go on the street, would sit there like this. Mm-hmm. And we'd see everything. So, I guess I had this kind of view through cinema and TV about how we wanted to or how I would like to later on look at this incredible community.
Mm-hmm. When did you have the chance to finally go back and start working on that community? And actually, something happened in the intervening period.
Oh yeah, well we went to high school in Rikers Island a couple of times, and that's just a joke. For anybody who knows criminal justice, you know that this is a very important place, a dark place. We fell into the drug world like my stepfather, and so I was a bad boy, and so I came up, David, to buy heroin, believe it or not, $2 bags of heroin. And so that was the 70s, and so I got to meet a different side of a barrio at the time. But I also noticed something even in the 70s, which was quite remarkable. I bet you folks don't even know this, but in the 80s, there were over 150 churches in 2.5 square miles in El Barrio. Mm-hmm. Now, I don't know what that means to you, whatever your faith is, but whenever I looked at that, my friends said, yeah, well, this is amazing. So these kinds of references come much later, and that later period in my life was when I went to the International Center of Photography, mm-hmm. and then Fred Richin gave us an assignment to go to photograph the gentrification of East Harlem.
Now, when he said that, what was your reaction, having had this past experience?
Well, this is like my back door. I understand the community. You know, I was honored to be able to do a project like that, but I needed to go a hell of a lot deeper than what I did in that 6 months. There were 9 students from all around the world, and we all went up there to do interviews and photograph the bad buildings and the changes of the buildings, because people were fighting back, like Estela Vasquez, who lived on 104th Street, and she, you know, she was out there. You'll see her in the pictures, you know, out there every weekend taking over buildings.
She's no joke.
No. And so, you know, we just kept on keeping the connections. I guess I get that from my mom, and maybe from, well, you know, you talked about something I have to mention. You know, you said that this is an important place. This is where my mother grew up, a couple blocks away on Columbia Street. It's where my grandfather jumped ship with no papers, right about 1 mile away from here, swam to the shore to be with his grandmother here. So this was an important place, but then extended our families up to El Barrio whenever we got that chance. So back in the 80s when we were up there, I didn't know what I was doing, David. I really didn't. I mean, I shot Tri-X, I shot a lot of black and white film, and I just didn't know what I was doing.
What kind of stuff were you shooting in the beginning?
Well, you know, someone in the building would go like, look at these rats. So I went and I shot the rat. You know, or the broken mailboxes, or the needles on the floor, or you know, the apartments with no water and no heat. So there was no New York 1 and no these 311 numbers you can call about complaining. So families had a lot to tell us, basically. And we did this first kind of multimedia project about you know, with the slides and the audio. So, but when I left school, I got a job working at the Black Star Photo Agency, and then that's when I really kind of took it upon my own to start going up to El Barrio every weekend. And that went on for about 1.5 years.
What were you doing on those weekends? What were you going to?
Well, I spent a lot of time going to church. So, I met a Deacon Lugo, and, you know, I'm used to suffering, so my knees are all busted up because that's what we do as kids. You know, we were forced to go to church and kneel. So I learned the art of patience by doing rosarios with families. Now, us Puerto Rican folks, when we lose a family member, especially our older families, like mothers and grandfathers and uncles, and would sit at home and pray. They would cook, of course, and have food and stuff, but pray, and I'm talking about praying like 2 days of praying.
But you'd have usually an older woman from the congregation would show up to do the rosario, and it would be a combination of fervor and crying. And performance.
Right. Oh, yeah, no, totally performance. And then there was always music in the back because, you know, we know how to suffer, but we also had to live. So it's part of that whole experience. And I didn't understand that, David, but those were very important experiences for me to understand what I call my philosophy of sitting at the kitchen table, which is the process I do, which is the art of listening and watching before I go out and photograph. So there was a lot of that because my goal was to meet families to get into the apartments, and the only way to do that was through, you know, these folks that had trust in the community. So it's kind of like one of the strategies or one of the ways that we sort of begin the journey. Yeah.
How did this start transforming into what it eventually became on the cover story for Nat Geo?
Well, I was shooting for practically a whole year, and I had collected, in those days would be called a carousel, where you put your slides into this carousel to show on a projector. And I told Howard Chapnick, God rest his soul, this man of Black Star, who really gave me the shot of life. He said to me, he said, "You're going to quit. Why are you quitting?" I said, "Because, you know, I want to do this project." And then so he looked at the work and edited it, and then he started sending me around. He sent me to New York Times Magazine. They weren't interested. Stern Magazine wasn't interested. German Geo. Then he sent me down to National Geographic. And I'll be candid with everybody. I smoked some weed before I went down. I didn't think anything was going to happen, you know, because I mean, why are they going to hire me, you know? So what happened was the truth. The real moment in time was I go with my slide carousel. I meet everybody. I'm kind of suited up, and then Thomas Kennedy was the director of photography at the time. Was busy. So Susan Smith, who was his assistant, came out and said, "Well, sorry, he's not going to see you." And that's what I figured. So I'm getting ready to leave. And she said, but hold on a second. So then she shows it to Tom, and then Tom comes out, and then they grab me. Now, this is what's magical about this man, Howard Chapnick. He was a gambler. Every day he would play the ponies. And so, and this is how it went down. So I leave. I call Black Star. I say, well, I think the meeting went okay, but, it was nice. They say they like your pictures, whatever. And then he called, and he said, well, what did you think? He said, well, we like how he shoots. He said, but we can't commit to anything. So then I said, oh, okay. And I just figured it was just one of those scenes. But Howard pushed it. He goes, well, why don't you just give us 100 rolls of Kodachrome and let's see what Joe can do in 2 weeks. And at that time, my first wife was pregnant, and there was a lot going on, and she had twins, and we had to leave. But I worked those 6 weeks really super hard. So the next sort of connection that I made was with the Little Sisters of Assumption, and they're still there. There's this group of nuns, yeah, but they were on 118th at that time. And by me going, you see, when I would go every week, every day, people get to meet you and they get to trust you. And then so this one nun says, okay, you want to meet some families? She took me to this one building on East 117th Street where I spent 1 year, 2 years photographing, and then a variety of families there. Peter Rodriguez was one of the families, and who I'm still connected with today. So I think that was the beginning of the journey, right? And probably the most important question that I would ask was, I got to interview with this sister who was working with this family, Monique's mom, and I sat with her at the kitchen table, and she said, "Well, why do you want to do a story about me? I'm poor. I'm black. It's a tough neighborhood. All this stuff." I said, "You're my mother. We grew up on welfare. I grew up poor. I grew up with roaches. I grew up with all this stuff. I grew up with taking the laundry down 6 flights of steps. So, I want to just honor you." And so that was the beginning of the journey to kind of get to understand that way of talking, that way of listening, which, and also from, the reason why, David, we didn't talk about this, was the reason why to do this work and with such passion and such humanity was because I grew up just like you did and Angel did, and people that grew up Puerto Rican in New York, we saw our people in the newspaper every week. It was like somebody got shot, somebody got thrown a baby off the roof, the garbage, this, and I knew we were more than that.
I would hope so. How those 6 weeks, how'd you go about it? What were the highlights of those?
It was just hitting the block. I mean, I remember I went to the block, and so you have to work the street and you have to work the inside, because my problem was I used to get very close, and then I'd get feedback from the editor, and he goes like, "Well, you need to back up." And that's harder to do when you got a camera on your shoulder and people are staring at you. Not like today where everybody has one, but So I went on this same block on East 117th Street. I didn't know that these two guys sitting on a stoop with the lookouts, right, for the drug scene. I didn't know that this was a 24-hour drug spot. I didn't know that Peter Rodriguez on the first floor had the peephole and passing the money. I got later to know these folks, and we got closer. But this was probably one of the... It's a question I get asked a lot. How do you start? I sat there by photographing the children on the block, and they were just playing. And people come up to me and go like, "What are you doing? What are you doing? What are you doing?" I said, "I'm just photographing our people, our children." And the other thing that I would do, I didn't have no money, so I shot slides. And I would bring those slides back every single week on a slide sheet and keep it in my camera bag. And whoever I saw on the street, today you just give them a selfie or whatever, you just give it to them, right? But I would give them the slide, and they would go to the drugstore on 16th Street and you got a print made if they wanted. So it was about giving something back. And by me returning, it's the returning thing, yeah.
What kind of feedback were you getting from the editors as you were working on this? How was it received?
I had a good editor, Susan Welchman, because she was a New Yorker. She worked at the New York Post as a photo editor for many, many years. So I was blessed to have somebody who really understood what we were looking at. The problems that I had were the writers.
Oh, well.
We went to 3 writers. 3.
3? For one photographer. Damn, you were bad.
Yeah, for one story. There's a lot of stories. But look, I honor the fact that National Geographic gave us that opportunity. But I think you're going to probably reference what happens after the work is published.
Well, we get to that eventually. But was there any hint of anything as that process was starting and going along?
Yeah, there were hints because I would get feedback from Howard. Howard was an amazing editor, and so I would show him the works, right? Because we were smart. We processed in New York because Geographic would ask you to process with them, and then you wouldn't see that stuff for 6 to 8 weeks. So I needed to see this stuff on a weekly basis, and then that's where my vision grew, where my storytelling skills grew, and the connections to the folks grew. Yeah. So, but the core for me was all about family. It's where it all begins for me and my work. So spending time. I remember being with the Wilson family, and I said to her that night before we started to shoot, I said, "Look, I asked her very simply because I think this has been my strategy from day one. What time do you get up in the morning?" She said, "Well, I get up at 6 a.m. and I wake the girls up." I said, "Okay, I'll be here with donuts and coffee 6 a.m." I was there at 5:50 outside the door. Knocked on the door. She lets me in. I take one picture. Now I can't go in the room with her because she has daughters and they were getting dressed, and so I shot her in the mirror. And then after that, this is when I really learned about patience. The kids go to school. I'm sitting in the living room. Now we're going to watch TV for the rest of the day together. I'm going to play Scrabble with the little guy. I'm going to, we're going to do this and that. Watch the roaches crawl, do this, that. Could take out the garbage for you. You want anything from the store? Come back 3 o'clock, then it all starts again. So that was a real learning curve. But that's kind of like the way it all began. And that building was really popular, really crazy.
As you were doing this project, what were some of the images or some of the preconceptions some of the images that were important to you that you had to get, and also in terms of the preconceptions that we've been talking about over the years about that place, how did you decide to address that?
Well, I got connected with Peter Rodriguez, and at this point, he's living in a building on the first floor. He's a drug addict, heroin addict, and he's on methadone, he's still on crack, and I'm watching this family that I'm working with for almost a year, and it's just so I shoot what's in front of me, right? But I also understand addiction very well, and this is something that David knows very well about me, is that it's dark. The world is dark. So I shoot that dark world. I shoot guys shooting up. I shoot the drugs. I shoot these things. However, I'm looking for the hope, folks. And the hope is Peter Rodriguez is also a father. Peter Rodriguez is holding his son. He just washed his son in the bathtub, and he's combing his hair. And growing up with a stepfather who was a dope fiend didn't do that for me. So it wasn't. There was this sense of trying to, I guess, always look for family that wasn't really there for me. So using these public people to tell that story, but in a way that's much more complex, because the papers, would tend to always photograph this underbelly side, right? But I also saw that we would come up. So Peter would have those good days like any other drug addict would have, unless he's really bad and beating his kids or a pedophile or something like that, then we don't even go that route. But I have to talk about this. This is extremely important. I'm with Peter Rodriguez for a year with Yvonne, and Yvonne lives right here, and Peter, they know me, and we're still family, and we just saw each other just a couple months ago, and they were older and everything, but Peter was on the drugs, and I walk in the door, and I just coming out of school, so who did I study with? Our famous Queen Donna Ferrato. So I remember living with the enemy as this domestic violence. Another chapter of my childhood growing up, I saw that, lived with that. And I walk in, and the first thing that a photographer usually does is to pick up the camera when a scene is happening. But Yvonne was crying, like there. And Peter was in rage, here. And the kids were a mess, crying. The camera goes down. I take Peter, I leave. I say, Peter, let's go, man. We go for pizza, we calm him down, get him a 40, it was not the time to take the photograph. And that, for me became photographs not taken. And I think that's something important for my learning curve as well.
But I think that's something we see also in your other work, like the gang work out of LA. I mean, this kind of long-term project that takes people that sometimes you just categorize as gangbanger, ex-con, and over the period of time, I mean, you're there to see a transformation.
Absolutely, and I think that's important. It's important for the media. I mean, that's why I got much love for the New York Times and for Jim, and Jim Estrin's here, not just because he's here, he's our big teddy bear, but and David and Jeffrey Scales and other editors that I work with, because they get it. They get that it is just not about just that one side. Because David, I was going through Black Star, and we would send our photographs to the World Press Photo and to the National Press Photographers Awards, and I just started to get really taken back by what the judges would always pull and applaud, like tragedy. Yes, it's important to document and to see, but there's a lot to life, which I receive much earlier on through my experience and learning with the Photo League, Louis Hine, these photographers who lived in New York City, who looked at our humanity, not just our problems.
Right. I mean, it's like looking at a place like El Barrio also. For those of you who don't know, look up the work of Frank Espada, and you'll see a very different side of El Barrio that was shot at the same time that East 100th Street was being done. Yeah. And it looks like a totally different world, and there's a very good reason for that.
No, Frank Espada, was someone I used to almost pray to, like Petey Thomas. Was those two guys who were just like, but there was nobody, I didn't know Angel yet, I didn't know you yet, I didn't know who else was out there being Puerto Rican.
None of us did.
None of us did. We weren't really connected like we are today. Today we're just like, move over, folks. Rodriguez, number second name in the country now, okay? It's not Smith and Jones. So we're here. We're here to stay, Donald Duck. We're here. So you're hungry, like the way you're hungry for a father you never have. I remember one day. I can't, it's hard to talk about this. This little boy, I'm photographing in the back. And our children have to play with garbage. Garbage. This little girl went into the garbage bin and put out a toaster oven. She took an old steak and put it on there. And I watched these children playing. They had nothing. And this little boy comes up to me at the end and he says to me, "Could you be my father?" Yeah, these tears are real tears. These are tears for those children, And so that's when I realized that this work is sacred. Yeah. Apologize.
That's okay. Not at all. I mean, you talk about things like the picture's not taken, and I think a whole lot of us know that one when you're in a situation that some other folk might shoot because editors like certain kinds of pictures sometimes, or they think an editor might like this. Right. But sometimes the best picture you can do is not to take one, basically, and let people have their dignity.
Yeah. The proudest day of my life, folks. The proudest day. I walk into 100, this is after the story's published. I go into the library. Now, Angel, these guys, they know where the library is. 110th Street, Lexington and 3rd. I walk in there, and there's National Geographic. And there's a couple of boys sitting at the table, and they're looking at their own community, and they go like, "Holy, this is our neighborhood." And then they said, "His name is Rodriguez," and that was just like, whoa. And then I understood the power of the media and what we could possibly do. And then I start seeing Angel in the paper, the Daily News first, right? Didn't you work yeah? And then I'm like, damn, that's where I want to go. And so, and then life goes on, and we get to meet these other guys. But, I guess I took on two roles in a way, because when I went into the Smithsonian, after the story was published, I'm very proud. I'm down in D.C. They're going to give me another story to photograph in Mauritius, in Africa. And so I go over to the Smithsonian to spend some time. I love that museum, the art museum there. And I make an appointment with the director of prints and photographs. And I walked around the museum. I already did two days of looking around, and I said, I don't see us here. And so this is when I start to learn how to use the guild card. And I think maybe they felt a little guilty that we Puerto Rican people aren't in this museum yet. But I pushed it, and that's when they did the first edition of Spanish Harlem, which is called The American Scene. They did a series of documentary books. And that was, I think, Steve Dietz, who used to work at Aperture with Daniel Power back in the day. So that was the kind of beginning, because the education that I was giving them, or not education, I'm not a big, person that likes to talk that way, but I just was making them aware, this is 1990, that the growth of what they like to use the word Hispanic America is on the rise. So you may want to take a look now, folks, because, then. And so I think they kind of like maybe got a little bit, because then they finally bought a couple of prints from the Spanish Harlem. So,
but within the Geographic, what happened after that story came out?
Well, I was living in Sweden. My kids were born, and then all of a sudden the magazine comes out, and then I see it in the World. I see it in the Herald Tribune. I see it in the Financial Times, and I see my cover, and I see Will Garrett was fired. And I was like, fired? And I was like, uh-oh. And so I called Susan Welchman. I asked what happened, and basically he was trying to change a little bit of the culture of the magazine. He was trying to do more stories. He did the Exxon oil spill. I don't know if you folks are aware of how much money Exxon gives to the National Geographic Society. You may want to open that one up, because that's a very deep one right now. So he did the Exxon oil spill. Uh-oh. He did the fall of the Berlin Wall. He did AIDS in Uganda. He did growing up in East Harlem. And then I guess mine was the straw that broke the camel's back, because Mr. Grosvenor did not like the way the magazine was going. And then they did a small in-house survey. 7 of the editors, when I came back, said that they should not be doing stories about, urban poverty in America. I guess it's okay to go to Africa and go over there. So that's when I start to really flip. And only a year later, I go to LA, because I just left this career. I could have had a career with Geographic, but chose not to.
What you go back to about here a lot still, and we run into each other over there. When you go there now, what do you notice most in terms of the transitions that are happening now?
Well, if you stand on 16th Street and Lexington Avenue at 5 to 7 o'clock, you'll start to see a different type of persons that come out of the subway.
It used to be like in the 80s when I used to work downtown and I used to take the 6 train home. I would just stand in front of any white person, because by 86th Street they'd be gone.
Yeah.
And that, you can't do that anymore. But those of us who used to live up there, it's it's the easiest way to get a seat.
Yeah. No, it's changed. I mean, exactly. In the back of where Peter lives and Peter's mom lives, she lives on 118th Street between Pleasant and First Avenue. There's this glass. You know how they build now? All this glass, right? And she says in Spanish, she says to me, these pendejos, man, what is up? Because I'm going to tell you why. It's like my mother, she lost it when in Park Slope when they started doing the same thing where we grew up. It was that they don't put any curtains on the windows. So now we're watching people walk around in calzones. Do you know what calzones are? Your underwear. Yeah. So why do we got to look at you? Why don't you put some curtains on the windows? I mean, literally, you're right there where that door is, and they grew up. So now you got little children looking at them. Got to see their big flat screen TVs. They got to show off all their wealth. I mean, you want to live there, that's fine, but blend in. Say hello to your neighbors. That's the other thing. All right, folks. I mean, we talk about how messed up this country is right now. Hello. Start doing this a little bit more, okay? Yeah. Do this, and do this a little bit more. Yeah. And take your phone down a little bit more. Yeah, and really, and then because that's the way we grew up. Que no, Angel? Angel, no? I mean, you sit on the stoop, we get smacked in the head by some neighbor because we just did something wrong. I mean, people really talk to each other. And so, that's really old school New York, too, in a lot of neighborhoods, yeah.
But I started seeing it about here when Christy Z does the park jams, and they used to do it at White Playground, and there's a brand new tower there, and then the people in the tower start complaining about the music.
Right. And now everybody loves the music. You know, I remember just 4 or 5 people get together and just with the conga drums and start jamming, and then you go to the casita, and I mean, you folks don't know this, but these little casitas, whenever the holidays came, you take the whole pig. My uncle used to do this, the whole pig. And we'd be sitting there, get so angry because it takes, how long does it take to cook a lechon? I mean, it takes a long whole day, right? And so, but that's what we did. And then we break bread and we eat food and, yeah, everything else is crazy around us, but, we still have the life, Yeah.
Places like El Barrio are changing. If you ever told me that you'd see the South Bronx gentrified, I would have thought you were smoking that whack. But all these places that were traditionally foundational Latino neighborhoods, and really Puerto Rican neighborhoods, because we kind of came first and set the stage for the others. We made it the kind of city that other Latinos would want to move to in terms of being friendly to folks who speak Spanish, providing services and what have you. The question is, I mean, what's left for folks like that in a city like New York, where it says, the rich and, the gap is huge, and housing is insane, and people are just being pushed out.
I mean,
what's the future of a Puerto Rican community in New York?
I think we just got to get back to the roots. What I loved about the Young Lords, I mean, yeah, I was too busy shooting dope back then, but, I learned so much from them. I really did. We got to fight. And I mean, fight. I mean, fight means, we got to let people know what time it is here. And thank God we live in New York City because, if I lived in Mississippi or if I lived in Missouri, I think I'd have a lot more trouble trying to sort of be a Latino, if you know what I mean. Yeah. So I just think that, we're more educated now, so that's great. And there's a whole new wave of activism now. That's great, too. I love what's going on in Hunter College. I love the Puerto Rican Studies Department, how that's grown and how that's big. I love what's going on in the South Bronx in terms of how people are really fighting there. I've been spending the whole summer there, right, working on reentry. And so, but, it's happening. We're sitting in a park together in the South Bronx, and we could see not too far away these new buildings going up and how things are dramatically changing. So, yeah. Well, my other beautiful place to look at. So I think I learned a lot from our elders. One thing that I try to stress with a lot of younger photographers is really go back in history. You'll be a better photographer and a better storyteller if you do, because once you know what's been, you'll know how to go forward. It's not to live in the past. I know they call me Gramsci now because I'm on Instagramsci. You understand? Instagramsci, yeah, everything's old. Everything's like, when are you going to stop putting new stuff up there? Well, you got to keep that history alive. And so that's where I think it's important. Yeah.
We have like about 15 minutes left. I'd like to throw it open for questions. And it's kind of hard to see with the lights in my eyes. Sure. Yes.
Would you stand up, please? We're going to put you on the spot. All right. Well, it's okay. We have patience. We're Puerto Rican. Yeah. Okay.
So I'm a journalism graduate. My name is Katerina. I wanted to ask you, you mentioned when you were working with National Geographic that you had some trouble with the writers. I was wondering if you could share a little bit more about that.
Let me give you a funny story. I'll start with a funny one. There was a photographer that was working on a story called Broadway. Now, Broadway runs from the tip of Manhattan, goes way upstate, right? The actual street. And so I had already been spending a lot of time in El Barrio and in Harlem. So another editor contacts me and asked me if I could be this photographer's fixer for a day. So the first thing I tell this photographer, it was a woman, I said to her, whatever you do, please, don't come in with your fancy watch and your fancy pocketbook and your fancy clothes. We're going to up on Broadway. So we stop at 135th and Broadway. We go to a basketball court, and we're in there for 5 minutes, and it happens. Yo, nice pocketbook. And you know what that means. See, now, if you're not from the street, you don't know what we're talking about, but that's the first conversation. Anytime somebody wants to try to jack you or rob you, the first thing they're going to go, oh, nice watch you got there. Or they'll ask you, what time is it? Yeah. So I see the trouble already, and I say to her, look, I told you don't come this way. She came with a Gucci watch. She came with this. She came with that. I said, you can't be a fashionista when you're working up here. The second, then that wasn't a writer I was working with, but she was a National Geographic photographer. The first writer, she was too much of a socialist. Like she was telling the truth, the real truth, gentrification, the drugs, good families, all that stuff. Her story didn't make it. The second writer wasn't really that experienced. The third writer, now I have to take him up to about her. He's the guy whose name, he's in the magazine, he wrote the story, and I tell him, we're on 96th Street, we're about to go uptown, I say, listen, whatever you do, please, you got that nice watch, just put it in your pocket, you know, and so he writes that. He goes, well, Joe Rodriguez said, as we walk to East Harlem, that this is gonna be the most, you know, dangerous place to be, and you can get mugged, and, you know, I mean, I'm verbatim, that's pretty much what he was saying, and I was like, oh man, I gotta live through this, and I've had to work with a lot of writers like that, to answer your question. So this is where I begin to tell the stories the way I think they need to be told. One is, I'm a turtle, not a hare. Meaning I'm not the rabbit. A rabbit is kind of like the spot news photographer who's in and out, and there are great guys that do that. I'm the opposite. I need to go slow. Because I like listening, watching, looking at all your faces and then move forward, and so by doing that, it enabled me to sort of listen and tell more of a story. So, and that's the way I've been since 1990. Does that help? Okay. And it's not that you can't help a writer understand, but, you know, I had recently had an interview where I literally had to edit with my wife 3 times my own story because certain people see us in a certain prism or never lived with us or spoke with us, or, you know, and it's not necessarily their fault. But if you want to talk about the history or how we're portrayed in this United States of America, I'll take you way back. All right? So every slave that was hung, every person that was persecuted, all right, this is how we were brought up. Now the new image is pretty much just a guy in a hoodie. Look at any news media across the country. And this is liberal media we're talking about. So if you want to tell a real story, then I think you should take some time and really get to know it. Yeah. Any other questions? Oh, come on, this ain't church. Well, you know, in photojournalism, we're taught, and you go to if you go to school, the Missouri School of Journalism, you're taught you should be neutral. I think it is for me, and I don't do stories. The folks in this room who know me well, I'm just like Jamel. We live the stories, and when you live a story, you were people. You got to honor them. Now, I'm not going to shy away because your boy's a gangster. It's big time. You know, I hung out in L.A. They used to put the guns in my car. But that's not the only thing I'm looking at. I mean, I'm looking at these men as I'm looking for them for their change, you know? You know, I mean, there's a quote I have. It says, you know, raised in violence, I brought my own violence upon the world, you know? I really did. What I hope the camera does for me, I use the camera to resist, to reclaim, to re-envision. Not just to document, right? We're in the Gramsci world here. The Instagram is so quick and fast and smooth. I get mad when people put pictures up that are important, David, and there's no voice there, there's no words there, there's no, you know, I mean, you know, I think that's important. You got to honor the people that are in front of you. This is the tradition. We grew up in New York. You know New York history? We're old school New York photographers here, so we know our history here. But the Photo League, whether you like them or you don't, I mean, they started as a group of photographers here in New York. I mean, they went to the communities, and they were all gringos. They went out to these black neighborhoods and hung out and listened and talked and ate and smelled and felt and to do what? To photograph us. To photograph us as human beings, not just as subjects. Yeah. So do what's in your heart. Don't do the Northern European model. Don't use your brain all the time. Use your heart. Come south, and you'll learn a lot. There you go. No, but I meant it as an analogy. Yeah. Anybody else? Come on, we're not gods here. Yeah.
I mean, this is going to sound, the secret to writing is writing. I mean, but that's the beginning of it. And then the other part of it is being self-critical. You look at your work, but more importantly, show your words to somebody you trust and respect and who's going to get it. Because sometimes, and I've done this with like younger photographers who get a really big break to do something, and they're photographing something that really has to do with their identity or their background, and they're being, quote unquote, mentored by upper middle class white men who don't really know the reality and are telling him how to photograph his community. And his initial instinct was the right instinct, but you get put down. So as I'm saying, when you get the right editor that you can trust, that understands you, keep writing and listen. That's one. The other thing is if you're writing with photographs or 2 photographs, you got to kill your babies. Sometimes the picture you love is not the picture that's going to tell the story. So the picture you love, you put that on your living room in a place of honor, and the one that tells you story is the one you print. But again, it involves having that conversation with someone. Again, we're too close to this sometimes as a photographer and as a writer. But, especially when you get to that point where it's like, if you're choosing the words a certain way or you're writing a certain way, that might dictate what might be the better picture, and that might not be the one that makes your heart go pitter-patter. but the real thing is to read. I mean, it ain't rocket science. It's just reading and writing and getting feedback. The feedback part is important because you really need to know where you're going astray, if you will. Writing is hard. Writing is real hard. The more you do it, the better it gets. But I'm not going to lie and tell you that, at my age in this business, it's any easier.
Let me piggyback on your question here. I'm going to tell you something about National Geographic, okay? I know that all of you know the magazine, and it's one of the most premier photographic magazines of the world. But I remember, because the review process is intense. At least it was back then. I don't know how it is today because a lot of stuff is digital. I had to go into a room, show my slides with 7 editors, right? My editor, print editor, the legal department, everything. So these photographers would come in with these amazing photographs. Yeah, and show them. Like this, one after the other. Beautiful, beautiful work, beautiful work. And where is the information? Out the door you go. So that's where I learned the importance of the caption. Extremely. And they give you these little books, right, that you would have to write everything out on. Now everybody does it on their phone, but you can write all these out, carbonless paper. You send that copy to your editor with your film. So every photograph you take, if you think it's important to you, right, and you put the time in there, then spend a little time to find out what it is you just photographed or who it is you just photographed. And that's what you put in. And the other thing that I would suggest is think about the hashtags you're going to put in. Yeah. Don't put in the cameras, please. Don't put in, you don't have to put in the film. I mean, all you're doing is you're helping the great yellow father up there sell more film, right? We're not here to sell film. We're not here to sell cameras. Put things that really matter to you. If it's photojournalism, hashtag photojournalism. If it's documentary, hashtag documentary. And then you're going to get a whole different readership. I made a big boo-boo, folks. David, I want to bring this up. I started putting up East Side Stories in the summertime, and the biggest mistake I had, and my wife was the one who called me out on this, was that I hashtag gangs. Oh, my God. That was the worst thing I ever did. So I stopped doing that because you get every crazy person coming at you, who's not reading anything anyways. So hashtags are very important. Yeah. Yes, sir.
My name is Kareem. Wanted to ask, at what point did you understand that the narrative surrounding the community needed to change and that you were a part of the change?
Since I was a kid. You grow up here and you're a spick, you're a nigger. I mean, it's hard to take that stuff, folks. And we lived through that stuff through generations. Don't we live through that generations? Go ask your grandmama if she's still alive. God bless, right? I mean, one day, Jamel is one of my closest brothers, right? One day, we were talking on the phone, and we have our deep conversations. And you remember this, man. I started crying with you, remember? We live this stuff. We carry it since we were children. So all we're doing is what our elders have been through. I just saw Miles Davis documentary and John Coltrane's documentary just the other day. John Coltrane on Netflix and then Miles right here at the Film Forum. Man, come on now. What they had to go through to play their music. Then, talk about salsa music. I remember the LeBron brothers. They used to live in my building.
Okay.
In Williamsburg. We lived in Williamsburg for a quick minute. I remember, I think there was the LeBron brothers, but then they had another conjunto, which meant there was like 12 of them, and they all had to go out and play music for what? $40? And then back of the bus. A lot of stuff that you grow up with, you know?
But if I could jump in on that.
Yeah.
I mean, the whole question of how people perceive our communities, whether communities of color or working class or what have you, some things haven't changed. I mean, you know, I'm watching, you know, Joe Biden talk about, you know, sending social workers and, you know, correcting pathological black parents when, if anybody here knows the work of like somebody like Zun Lee, you'll find out that actually, you know, single black fathers are very involved, actually, much more so than one would imagine, or much more so than one has been told, shall we say. So we haven't gotten that far, but I mean, it's like almost like, you know, we have to be looked at as having some sort of dysfunction. But what really just, you know, and you know I'm going to say this, anybody who's heard me talk knows I'm going to say this, I'm just sick and freaking tired of black and brown dysfunction being the hallmark of great, serious photography. It's bullshit, okay? Let's just, you know, the sooner we get away from that, the better we'll all be.
And I'll interrupt that because what's important is there's two guys in this room that were spearheading. David Gonzalez and Jim Estrin spearheaded to this day, if it's still working, you'd still see this, to change that narrative. Do you understand, folks? To really work really hard to make sure that other voices were being heard, right, through New York Times lens. If you folks want to write to the New York Times and tell them bring back our boys, please tell them to do that, and tell them to give them a raise too, because they've done a lot to be able to make the, you know, the voices in photography. Yeah, so
it's just like, it's way overdue. I mean, you know, you just get tired of hearing people who are only conversant with one culture tell you, who can move among several, what really works for covering that culture. I mean, it's like, it's so absurd to actually have to sit in front of someone and say, you really believe this shit? I mean, you know, I'm 62. I've done it all. I'm tired of this shit now, you know? There's time, and the time is long overdue. It's not just now. The time was, you know, 40 years ago when I'd read the New York Times, and it would be like, you know, a fucking safari in the South Bronx.
So, you know, I teach at NYU, and I have taught at the International Center for Photography, but at NYU, you know, I've got 6 girls and one boy from Shanghai, and I sent them out to get lost. Do you know what that feels like to get lost as a photographer? Yeah, you can be a Sunday photographer and go out and take a picture or whatever. But when you go get lost is the most magical thing for a photographer sometimes when you find a great picture. So I send all 6 students out for the whole semester to Jackson Heights. Now, Jackson Heights, Queens, for those that may not be too familiar with New York, is one of the most diverse or one of the most important communities in the United States. It's where Ocasio is representing as well. And I think there's, I don't know how many languages, maybe Jim knows this better than I do, but there are how many languages? 800 languages. You hear me, folks? 800 languages. Huh? That's the old New York. Everybody thinks that this place here, right here, Dumbo, and across the river is New York. That's not New York. Jackson Heights is real New York. Those are our school teachers. People clean our houses. They come and take care of our babies. They do all the work. Yeah. So getting them out. Now, these are students not from New York. These are students from the Midwest, from California, and they're biting their nails because they're not used to doing what? Sir, what's your name? Can I ask you where you live? They would come back with pictures. I said, no, you're not good. No, go back out. And I spent the whole semester there.
Talk to strangers.
Exactly. We used to have this thing. I think it was the Daily News. Who used to run it. Right now, Man on the Street. You remember? The Inquiring Photography. They would always run this every week, right? It was there. You know, it was. Yeah, it would ask a question, and there would be pictures of the people that would answer the question. Don't be afraid. Yeah. You know, just do that. So I think getting people to sort of break that comfort zone, because you know it's nerve-wracking. Yeah.
It's 4 o'clock, and we have to get out of here, unfortunately. But this has been a lot of fun, and I'm glad.
Take one more question if you want to
go.
They
said 4 o'clock.
Well, she said I can get 5 more minutes. So any other questions before we close? Don't come out to me and start crying later. Okay. Any questions? We love you. Yes, yeah. There's a question right here with the lady. Yes. Oh boy. Re-entry. Following people coming home from prison upstate to the Bronx, HIV positive folks. Important story for the Washington Post, mass incarceration issue in their magazine. So, you know, and then we're doing a book on Taxi Driver. That was my first project, which will come out in when? Andy Outis, my greatest designer right here, who did that fence out there. Big love to Andy Outis, yes sir, and did the book as well. So we're gonna got a couple of things. Quick question. Quick. Yes.
It's not quick. How many times have you seen history repeat itself in your career?
Oh man, come on now.
That's why I didn't want to.
Yeah, no, it's all good. It's all okay. Yeah, it's great. It's good. Thank you, Pablo. Love you, man. Thank you for coming. Oh, by the way, we do have books for sale at the general store, and they're all signed. So please help feed the starving artist. We love you and support Photoville. Thank you, folks. Thank you very much.